All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium are arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Surviving the Feminist Divorce, a guide to male resilience in a broken system. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. The Frivorce Insurrection, Why Your Side Hustle is the Only Alimony the State Can't Steal, Have You Lied, is a Marxist star chamber, and the X-test is psychological colonization. I watched a good man, call him Marcus, dragged through the family court abattoir last year, and the butchers didn't even bother wiping their blades. 17 years of provision, protection, and principled leadership dissolved in 17 minutes by a judge who recited feminist dogma like a Vatican II priest reading the telephone directory. His ex-wife fabricated abuse claims with the ease of a child telling Santa what she wants for Christmas. The police investigated nothing. The court believed everything, and Marcus lost his children, his home, and 43% of his pre-tax income for the next 18 years. When he attempted to present evidence of her adultery, documented, time-stamped, verified, the judge declared it irrelevant to the best interests of the child. Irrelevant. The word hung in the courtroom like a noose. This is not justice, gentlemen. This is extraction disguised as equity, a systematic plunder operation refined over 50 years of cultural Marxist infiltration into our legal institutions. You've been brainwashed since birth to believe the fundamental lie that men and women operate under identical moral frameworks, that female nature mirrors male nature with different plumbing, that your sacrifices will be recognized and reciprocated. This is insanity, masquerading as chivalry, a psychological virus injected into the Western male mind to facilitate his own dispossession. Schopenhauer understood this 170 years ago. Female nature operates through indirection, emotional manipulation, and the strategic deployment of tears as weaponry. The data is unambiguous. Women initiate 70% of divorces, with the rate jumping to 90% among college-educated demographics. They're not leaving because of abuse or abandonment. They're leaving because the state guarantees them your resources without requiring your presence. It's the greatest wealth transfer scheme in human history, and you're the willing victim signing your own extraction contract every time you say "I do" without ironclad prenuptial fortification. Here's what they don't teach you in your gynocentric school curriculum, your diversity-mandated workplace training, your feminized church sermons. Western civilization was built on the recognition of sex differences, not their denial. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric was designed precisely to cut through the emotional sophistry that now dominates every public discourse. Natural law teaches that justice requires equal treatment under law, not equal outcomes enforced by tyrannical social engineering. The virtues, virtus, manly excellence, demanded that men discipline their desires in service to truth, family, and civilization. But a civilization that punishes masculine excellence while rewarding feminine deception has inverted the natural order, and inversions always collapse. You see the wreckage everywhere. Male suicide rates 4 times higher than women's, with those men erased from media narratives. 63 million abortions since Roe, each one a sacrifice to the god of female convenience. Cuckoldry rates between 10 and 30% depending on demographic, meaning millions of men are raising other men's children without their knowledge or consent. You want the red pill? Here it is, delivered directly to your spirit. The structure is not damaged, it is working exactly as intended. Your distress is not a flaw, it is the function. The subversives who penetrated your institutions grasped a reality most men reject. You cannot ruin a civilization by attacking it externally. You ruin it by demoralizing its protectors, by persuading them that their virtues are sins, their defenses are tyranny, their sacrifices are greed. They have turned your own conscience against you, gentlemen. The only cure, pay attention, is to retake your mind through strict logic, to reconstruct your financial life through the wisdom of diverse revenue sources immune to court orders, to master your emotions through stoic firmness that no manipulation can breach, and to accept that your worth is not tied to female approval. You are not a resource to be consumed. You are a sovereign intelligence made in the image of the Logos itself, and it is time, past time, you began acting accordingly. The architecture of erasure, how the gynocentric machine invalidates male suffering. The ancient Romans had a word for it, invalidus, weak, powerless, without force. When we speak of invalidation, we are not discussing mere oversight or bureaucratic negligence. We are confronting a deliberate ontological assault on male being itself, a systematic epistemological violence designed to maintain what can only be described as gynocentric hegemony. I have sat across courtroom tables from men whose souls had been hollowed out by this machine, men who entered the temple of justice, expecting the blind goddess only to find her peeking through her blindfold, weighing the scales with a thumb pressed firmly on the side of feminine privilege. Consider the formal structure of this betrayal. Major premise: institutions claiming impartial justice must apply equal protection, regardless of sex. Minor premise: family courts systematically privilege maternal custody, with over 80% of default placements favoring mothers. Conclusion: therefore, these institutions do not enact impartial justice, but gynocentric extraction. The syllogism is airtight, and no amount of feminist sophistry can breach its walls. The Duluth model represents arguably the most sophisticated hoax ever inflicted upon Western legal structures. Created in the early 1980s by feminist activists lacking any factual basis, this theoretical construct insists that domestic abuse serves solely as a mechanism of patriarchal oppression utilized by men to subjugate women. The issue: every rigorous replication study regarding intimate partner violence performed since the 1970s shows gender symmetry in aggression rates near 50%. When Murray Strauss and Richard Gels released their pioneering National Family Violence Survey in 1975, they anticipated verifying the feminist account. Conversely, they found that women started physical hostilities against their male partners at frequencies matching or surpassing those initiated by men. The feminist reaction was not to adjust the theory to fit the facts. Far from it, as doing so would necessitate following the scientific protocols and logical reasoning that our society developed over thousands of years. Rather, they entrenched their position, assailed the researchers, and installed the provenly false patriarchal terrorism framework into police training manuals throughout the English-speaking sphere. Let us perform an etymological autopsy on that cancerous phrase, toxic masculinity. The adjective derives from the Latin toxicum, meaning poison, specifically the poison in which arrows were dipped. The noun masculinity stems from masculus, the diminutive of mas, meaning male. Now the Romans gave us another word worth examining, virtus, which meant literally manly excellence, the quality of being a proper man, the cultivation of excellence in the masculine soul. Virtue and toxicity are, by definition, contradictory predicates. To speak of toxic masculinity is to commit a category error of such breathtaking proportions that it would have been laughed out of any medieval disputation hall. The cultivation of excellence cannot by its nature be poisonous. If a behavior is toxic, it is by definition not masculine in the virtuous sense. The phrase is not descriptive but prescriptive, a linguistic weapon designed to pathologize the very life force that built the Parthenon, drafted the Magna Carta, and walked on the moon. The Frankfurt School architects of cultural Marxism understood something vital about human psychology that most men still refuse to grasp. Control the framing, and you control the outcome. Critical theory's core methodology involves inverting the oppressor-oppressed binary to destabilize existing power structures, not through dialectical synthesis, but through what can only be described as epistemological terrorism. When Herbert Marcuse and his fellow travelers set about dismantling Western civilization, they recognized that the family unit served as the primary transmission mechanism for cultural values, masculine identity, and resistance to totalitarianism. The strategy was not to attack the family directly. That would have provoked immediate backlash, but to undermine the father's authority through 1,000 paper cuts of feminist jurisprudence, educational indoctrination, and media propaganda. The brilliance of this assault lies in its plausible deniability. Every individual policy shift could be justified as merely expanding rights for women, while the cumulative effect has been the near-total destruction of paternal authority and the transformation of marriage from a sacred covenant into a contract of male servitude. Dr. Seeger and his colleagues at the Male Psychology Network identified a cognitive distortion they termed gamma bias, a remarkable psychological filter that renders male suffering invisible while simultaneously amplifying female complaint to operatic proportions. This is not mere oversight but active suppression. When a man kills himself, which he does at rates 3 to 4 times that of women across every Western nation, the media response is silence or victim-blaming speculation about his personal failures. When a woman expresses discomfort on social media, the machinery of institutional compassion grinds into action with breathless urgency. The formal logic of this manipulation proceeds as follows. Major premise: a just cognitive framework must evaluate identical suffering, identically regardless of sex. Minor premise: male suicide receives a fraction of the attention and resources allocated to issues affecting women, despite vastly higher mortality. Conclusion: therefore, our cognitive framework is unjust and deliberately genocentric. The data is not in dispute. The epidemiological evidence is overwhelming and has been for decades. The Mockingbird media matrix functions via what economists call manufactured consent, the careful curation of permissible discourse through funding flows, institutional accreditation, and career incentives. Journalism schools have become seminaries of feminist orthodoxy, where aspiring reporters learn not to investigate truth, but to advance narrative. Feminist, non-governmental organizations receive hundreds of millions in government and foundation grants to produce research that inevitably confirms their ideological presuppositions, which is then cited by journalists who attended the same schools, who are then referenced by politicians seeking the female vote. The entire ecosystem functions as a closed loop of confirmation bias, impervious to external correction. When you follow the money trail, the results are illuminating. The same foundations funding feminist research are funding the journalism schools training the reporters who cite that research, creating a self-sustaining cycle of ideological reproduction. Thomistic natural law provides the philosophical antidote to this corruption if we have the courage to wield it. Thomas Aquinas understood that justice requires the recognition of objective harm regardless of the victim's identity, that deliberate blindness to suffering violates not merely human decency, but divine and natural order. The scholastic tradition gave us the conceptual tools to dismantle feminist sophistry. The principle of non-contradiction, the hierarchy of being, the recognition that truth is the conformity of intellect to reality rather than the imposition of will upon reality. The feminist project represents a revolt against ontology itself, a denial of the teleological structure of human nature in favor of an infinite malleability that places raw power above all other considerations. But nature cannot be defied without consequence, and the consequence of denying masculine nature is the production of damaged men, broken families, and a civilization in terminal decline. I recall a client, let us call him Marcus, who sat in my office clutching a folder of evidence that would have convicted his wife of perjury, fraud, and conspiracy to commit parental alienation in any rational legal system. He had text messages documenting her affair, bank statements showing the systematic transfer of marital assets to her lover, and recordings of her coaching their children to make false abuse allegations. The judge, a woman whose campaign had been funded by feminist political action committees, looked at this mountain of evidence and declared it irrelevant to the best interests of the child. Before awarding primary custody to the mother, and hitting Marcus with a support obligation that would require him to work 60 hours weekly just to remain solvent. This is not justice. This is extraction disguised as procedure, tyranny masquerading as law. Marcus's suffering was not merely dismissed, it was actively manufactured and then weaponized against him. The remedy begins with the restoration of proper naming, the first and most sacred duty of philosophy according to the Platonic tradition. We must call things by their true names. The family court system is not a neutral arbiter, but a gynocentric extraction machine designed to transfer resources from men to women while providing the procedural veneer of due process. Feminism is not a movement for equality, but a worldview fundamentally incompatible with Western civilization's foundational premises. The suicide epidemic afflicting men is not a mental health crisis, but a spiritual crisis induced by systematic devaluation of masculine being. Only by speaking these truths, loudly, publicly, without apology or compromise, can we break the spell that has enslaved so many of our brothers to false consciousness and self-blame. The truth shall set you free, but first it shall make you miserable enough to fight. Having diagnosed the gynocentric extraction engine, courts calibrated for plunder, media manufacturing consent for male disposability, academia declaring our very nature a sin, I offer not petitions for reform, but the architecture of strategic withdrawal. You cannot dialectic your way out of a gun aimed at your bank account. The Frankfurt School understood that economic dependence guarantees ideological submission. A man terrified of losing his livelihood cannot afford truth. Thus, resistance migrates from the courthouse, irredeemably corrupted, to the economy, where sovereignty endures for those who construct it properly. The sovereign provision, economic autonomy as resistance to extraction. Machiavelli cautioned that while fortune dictates half our deeds, she leaves the rest for us to control. Yet the contemporary submissive male, indoctrinated by a female-centric schooling that treats The Handmaid's Tale as holy writ and biology as heresy, surrenders his whole existence to the whims of fortune's hideous sibling. The government view the side hustle not as desperate struggling by the lower class, but as a calculated retrieval of command over one's own life. Depending on one W-2 boss makes you a peasant. Depending on one marriage contract makes you a bondservant waiting for the lash. The male who controls diverse income sources, dividends, crypto, consulting, trades, constructs a stronghold no solitary judge can tear down. Such is the framework of self-rule. To center your survival on a solitary salary or a solitary female breaks the fundamental rules of risk management, a foolishness so extreme it would embarrass a bridge builder who trusts gravity. Consider the cold, hard mathematics of what we politely call divorce, but which any honest observer would classify as state-sanctioned plunder. You have labored for decades, applying the cardinal virtue of prudentia, practical wisdom, to accumulate assets, only to find that the family court operates not on the logic of Aristotle, but on the emotional reasoning of a toddler demanding candy. In the United States, women initiate approximately 70% of divorces, a statistic that alone obliterates the feminist narrative of women as the eternal victims of patriarchal oppression. When the gavel falls, the equitable distribution of assets often results in the male protagonist being ejected from his own home, stripped of his children, and tethered to an alimony leash that turns his future labor into a tax for his ex-wife's lifestyle maintenance. If a stranger on the street took 50% of your wealth and enslaved you to a monthly payment, you would call the police. When a woman and a judge do it, society calls it equality. This is not a legal process. It is a Marxist extraction loop designed to transfer wealth from the productive, men to the consumers, women's state, and betting your financial life on a contract that can be unilaterally voided at whim is not love, it is strategic suicide. We must resurrect the ancient concept of prudentia, the mother of all virtues, which demands that we look reality in the face without flinching. The good provider is a mythological chump, a blue-pilled golem who believes that his utility will purchase him loyalty. Evolutionary psychology tells us that female hypergamy dictates a search for the highest possible status and resources, but it does not guarantee gratitude for resources already surrendered. In the twisted logic of the feminine-centric worldview, your provision is not a gift to be thanked for. It is a resource to be harvested. By accepting the frame that you exist to serve, you have already lost the dialectic. The remedy is resourcefulness, economic creativity, manifested as the stoic refusal to be dependent on the whims of an entity that views you as a disposable utilities box. True virtue is not working yourself to death to fund a spouse's Instagram lifestyle. True virtue is building an autonomous economic engine that serves your interests, adhering to the natural law of self-preservation, which the leftist hordes so desperately want to smother. Consider the principle of subsidiarity, a gem from the Catholic social teaching of the Western canon, which posits that matters should be handled by the smallest, most local competent authority possible. Yet we have utterly abandoned this wisdom in our personal economics. Why do we outsource our retirement to Wall Street sharks and our family security to a government bureaucracy that hates masculinity? Dependence on distant, unaccountable institutions is a violation of the natural order. It is the intellectual equivalent of asking a wolf to babysit your livestock. The microeconomy, the network of your skills, your tangible assets, your local barter relationships is the only domain where the living spirit of civilization can survive. When you participate in the shadow economy of masculine excellence, engaging in peer-to-peer commerce and mastering trades that cannot be litigated away, you starve the beast. You withdraw your consent from a system that uses your tax dollars to fund the very degeneracy, abortion on demand, transgender indoctrination, anti-male discrimination that seeks to destroy you. Let us apply the rigorous tool of the trivium to the provider trap through a dispassionate syllogism that cuts through the sentimental sludge. Major premise, exclusive provider status creates a single point of failure vulnerability in a man's life architecture. Minor premise, the state and its family court apparatus are structurally designed to exploit provider vulnerability via asset seizure and involuntary servitude, alimony. Conclusion. Therefore, provider exclusivity constitutes strategic negligence requiring remediation through diversified income architecture. This logic is irrefutable. If you are a high earner with a single job and a stay-at-home wife, you are walking onto a battlefield wearing a kick me sign. The leftist dogma relies on the gamma bias, the cognitive distortion that minimizes men's suffering and maximizes women's grievances to keep you blind to this trap. You must weaponize the truth. Your economic value is not a sacrifice to be made on the altar of female happiness, but a weapon to be wielded in the defense of your own sovereignty. The guild systems of old, the apprenticeship mastery ladders, and the fraternal orders of the 19th century were not mere social clubs. They were the engines of Western prosperity, creating walled gardens where men could trade secrets, perfect their craft, and build wealth away from the prying eyes of the state and the manipulative demands of the domestic sphere. We must revive this shadow economy of masculine excellence. Your skill stack, technical knowledge, coding, welding, financial literacy, intellectual property creation is the only asset that cannot be stolen by a lawyer or devalued by a central banker. When you possess a skill that is in high demand but low supply, you possess the ultimate freedom, the ability to walk away. This is the antidote to the cultural Marxism that infects our institutions. By becoming irreplaceably skilled and economically diversified, you render yourself immune to the extraction mechanisms of the feminine primary state, reclaiming the transcendental good of liberty for yourself and, by extension, for the civilization that depends on men having the spine to stand alone. This economic dislocation is but a symptom of a far more insidious rot, one that attacks the very logos of our civilization. The extraction of resources is merely the material consequence of a prior spiritual theft, the theft of truth. You cannot understand the mechanism of your plunder until you recognize that the predators have disabled the alarm system, objective reality itself. Having established how the modern Babylon picks your pocket, we must now examine how it poisons your mind, replacing the immutable laws of evidence with the solipsistic whims of the oppressed. the crucible of truth, integrity under interrogation in a post-honest society, the modern legal landscape has been terraformed by a cultural Marxism that seeks to replace the cold, hard currency of objective reality with the monopoly money of lived experience, creating a post-honest society where the truth is no longer an absolute, but a malleable tool of the oppressed. Look no further than the Believe Women dogma, an epistemological collapse that would make George Orwell blush. We saw this theater of the absurd play out in the Duke Lacrosse witch hunt, where a stripper's lies were elevated above the due process rights of innocent young men by a prosecutor pandering to a baying mob. We saw it in the Rolling Stones' Juve debacle, where a fabricated gang rape was used to tar an entire fraternity, proving that in the gynocentric order, the accusation is the conviction. We saw it in the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, where the burden of proof was inverted so grotesquely that a man was required to prove a negative regarding an event that arguably never happened in a timeline that didn't exist. These were not glitches in the system. They were features of a radical feminist framework that posits the female narrative as a sacred revelation, impervious to cross-examination. By rejecting the transcendent of the true for the pathology of standpoint theory, the left has erected a Kafkaesque tribunal where facts are treason and feelings are the supreme law of the land. You must understand that this systemic deceit is not an accident of history, but a function of evolutionary biology that we have foolishly legalized. While the Enlightenment gave us the tools of logic and natural law, the biological reality remains that the female of the species possesses a specialized capacity for manipulation honed by millennia of intrasexual competition and intersexual resource extraction. Schopenhauer identified this long ago. Nature does not care about your moral posturing. It cares about survival and replication. Evolution has equipped women with a verbal dexterity and a civil lying capacity, social lubrication, and tactical misdirection that men with our hunter-focused linear cognition struggle to detect. When a woman utilizes grammar bias or solipsistic framing, she isn't necessarily failing a moral test. She is passing a biological survival test. The tragedy of the West is that we have dismantled the checks and balances of patriarchy, which once restrained these primal impulses, and replaced them with a legal system that incentivizes the worst aspects of female nature, rewarding the deceitful accuser with money, sympathy, and power. This brings you to the front lines of the domestic trenches, the integrity interrogation. When a woman looks you in the eye and asks, "Have you ever lied to me, or did you do X?" recognize that you are not engaged in a dialectic pursuit of truth. You are facing a shit test designed to breach your frame. This is the polygraph paradox in action. The system and your partner demand radical transparency, a foolish vulnerability that no statesman would ever offer an adversary. If you confess to a minor sin, you provide the ammunition for your own execution. If you deny everything in the face of circumstantial evidence, you look weak and transparently deceptive. It is a trap designed to extract compliance. The blue-pilled simp confesses, thinking his honesty will buy him grace, unaware that in a gynocentric court, his confession is merely a nail for his coffin, and in his relationship, it is a transfer of power. To survive this, you must reject the binary idiocy of always tell the truth versus lie, and instead adopt the Aristotelian mean of honesty. Aristotle understood that virtue is not an extreme, but a mean between deficiency and excess. Honesty is not radical transparency, that is the vice of boastfulness or stupidity. Honesty is appropriate disclosure to worthy recipients. You do not owe the truth to those who would weaponize it against you, be it a predatory divorce lawyer or a spouse looking for a reason to blow up the family. You must employ the syllogism of the trapped answer. Major premise: confession of past dishonesty provides ammunition for future character assassination. Minor premise: denial of all dishonesty is transparently false and signals weakness. Conclusion: therefore, the proper response reframes the frame. Acknowledge human imperfection while refusing the specific indictment. You assert your frame, refusing to move to the interrogator's tune. Your shield in this chaos is the trivium, the bedrock of the classical liberal arts that the modern barbarians have burned from the universities. You must weaponize grammar to define your terms precisely, refusing to accept the nebulous shifting definitions of the left. You must employ logic to dismantle their emotional fallacies, spotting the ad hominem and the appeal to emotion instantly, and you must master rhetoric to present your case with the unshakable composure of a Marcus Aurelius. When the system screams at you to confess, to bend the knee, to validate the delusion, you stand silent and stoic. You do not argue with a fanatic. You do not plead with a liar. You maintain the dignified silence of the master who knows that the truth does not require his defense to be true, only his resilience to survive its persecution. You are the guardian of the Western spirit, and you will not be broken by a philosophy that crumbles at the slightest touch of reason. Having deflected the immediate thrust of the integrity interrogation with the shield of the trivium, we face a crisis far deeper than a tactical dispute over honesty, the total colonization of the male spirit. It is futile to parry the enemy's blows if you have internalized their morality. Accepting the grotesque premise that your masculine nature is a crime against the collective that requires perpetual atonement. We are living under a regime of psychological occupation, where the subject is conditioned to mimic his oppressors, believing that dignity is found not in sovereignty, but in the enthusiastic adoption of his own enslavement. The composed alliance, emotional sovereignty, and the parallel path of the colonized. The late, great Frantz Fanon, a theorist of the anti-colonial struggle, observed that the colonized subject first seeks to imitate the colonizer, believing that assimilation is the path to dignity, only to realize that the system is designed to consume him regardless of his performance. We find ourselves in a strikingly parallel predicament, shackled not by a foreign empire, but by a domestic gynocentrism so insidious it has convinced an entire generation of men that their slavery is a virtue. The modern husband, bombarded by the cultural Marxist apparatus of advertising, sitcoms, and pastoral counseling, has internalized the framing of his oppressor. He has been conditioned to believe that his natural authority is toxic and that his value is determined solely by his utility to the feminine imperative. This is the colonization of the mind, where a man policies his own thoughts and emotions to please a master who holds him in contempt for his submission. As CLR James understood regarding the mobilization of the marginalized, the only remedy for this psychological servitude is a parallel consciousness, a radical awakening where the red-pilled man rejects the oppressor's narrative, realizes his own inherent worth, and forges a new identity completely independent of the gynocentric matrix. Consider the diabolical propaganda of the phrase "happy wife, happy life," a slogan repeated with the mindless fervor of a cultist mantra by men who should know better. Analysis of this linguistic virus exposes it as nothing less than a suicide pact of male sovereignty, a demand for unconditional emotional servitude that would make a feudal surblush. The syllogism of the feminist framework is treacherous. If the woman's emotional state is the barometer of the relationship's success, and her emotions are inherently variable and often irrational, then the man is placed in a position of perpetual impossible subservience. By accepting this frame, you concede that your peace is contingent on her caprice, reducing yourself to an emotional tampon for her moods. The Western tradition of Stoicism offers the antithesis to this degradation. The good, the true, and the beautiful are not found in the fickle feelings of a woman, but in the unshakable composure of the masculine spirit. To believe that your happiness is dependent on hers is to make your soul a hostage to fortune, a violation of natural law that inevitably leads to resentment and ruin. The battlefield of this colonization is often the subtle theater of manipulation known as the X-test. You sit across from your wife or girlfriend, and with a glint in her eye, she praises a former lover, his physique, his spontaneity, his ability to make her feel alive. The blue-pilled beta, trained like a Pavlovian dog, reacts with jealousy or defensiveness, failing the test and signaling his insecurity. But let us employ the syllogism of the Stoic response to dissect this trap. Major premise: emotional reaction to competitor information signals insecurity and lower status. Minor premise: insecurity and lower status reduce sexual attractiveness and relationship power. Conclusion, therefore, composed indifference, not aggression, not withdrawal, is the optimal strategic response. This is not merely a tactic, it is an application of Hegel's master-slave dialectic in reverse. The slave is the one who craves validation. The master is the one who is indifferent to the opinion of the other. By remaining unperturbed, you demonstrate that her past lovers are ghosts, powerless to provoke you, and in doing so, you reclaim the frame and force her to qualify herself to you. This reclamation requires an architectural overhaul of the male psyche, a return to the mixed constitution of virtue described by Polybius. Just as a stable state requires the balance of monarchical authority, aristocratic virtue, and democratic responsiveness, the integrated man must possess a sovereign reason that rules over the aristocracy of his sentiments and the democracy of his instincts. The feminist dystopia seeks to overthrow this internal hierarchy, empowering the democratic mob of base emotions to tyrannize the monarchical rule of logic. When a man abandons his emotional sovereignty, he invites the chaos of the mob into his own soul. The remedy is found in the ancient concept of sui juris, being one's own master. We must build an alliance of such men, a composed alliance based on the principles of anti-colonial solidarity, shared consciousness, mutual support, and strategic coordination against the extraction of our resources and dignity by a broken system. This is not about withdrawal from the world, but about engaging it from a position of strength, where our imperturbability becomes a shield against the wickedness of those who seek to exploit us. In an age designed for our destruction, the man who cannot be provoked approaches the divine, participating in the transcendental excellence that is the birthright of Western man. The architects of this gynocentric abattoir count on your ignorance. They count on you believing the Duluth model is science rather than feminist fan fiction dressed in academic drag. They count on you waddling into family court like a lobotomized turkey, grateful for Thanksgiving, believing fairness is something the system still offers. They count on you confessing your sins to an interrogator who decided your guilt before your lips parted. And they especially count on you melting down when she mentions her ex's amazing abs, because an emotional man is a harvestable man, and the divorce industry has bills to pay. The extraction mathematics are not complicated. Over 800,000 American divorces annually, maternal custody awarded in over 80% of contested cases, alimony and child support transfers exceeding $40 billion yearly, all enforced by men with guns funded by your taxes. Meanwhile, male suicide runs 4 times the female rate, a silent holocaust receiving perhaps 4% of the coverage devoted to the gender wage gap myth. Coincidence? The same academics who vomited toxic masculinity into the discourse, a category error so profound that virtus literally means manly excellence. In Latin, will explain with straight faces that your suffering is invisible because privilege. This is epistemological warfare designed by Frankfurt School cultural Marxists who correctly identified the father as the load-bearing wall of Western civilization. But here is your liberation syllogism. The extraction machine requires your consent to feed. Diversified income streams deny it single point of failure access. Composed indifference to emotional sabotage denies it psychological leverage. Recovered natural law denies it moral legitimacy. You were never a victim. You were a prisoner of war who just discovered the cell door was unlocked. The guilds, mastery ladders, and civil associations that built Western civilization from Rome's ashes were your ancestors' immune response to exactly this parasitism. They knew what you must learn. Economic sovereignty is political sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty is spiritual sovereignty. And no man who fears a woman's opinion can ever be anything but livestock. I have handed you the red pill, brothers. I have shown you the cage architecture and provided the bolt cutters. Your side hustle is not desperation, it is strategic sovereignty. Your composed silence when she weaponizes her ex is not weakness. It is Marcus Aurelian imperturbability applied to sexual politics. Your refusal to confess your sins to your interrogator is not dishonesty. It is the Aristotelian mean between foolish transparency and vicious deceit. You now carry the accumulated wisdom of Western civilization's immune system against gynocentrism. Go forth and infect others with the cure. The truth you possess is more dangerous to the matrix than any weapon, because regimes built on lies cannot survive men who speak truth without apology. Share this, teach this, become this. The renaissance of masculine sovereignty begins with you. And now the sponsored book introduction, Surviving the Feminist Divorce, a guide to male resilience in a broken system. If your hands are shaking as you sign divorce papers that strip you of everything you built, welcome. I've stood where you stand. 10 years ago, I watched a judge award my ex-wife 60% of my tech startup's equity for emotional support during our 4-year marriage. She vacationed in Bali while I ate ramen in a studio apartment. This isn't bitterness, it's biology. Women's hypergamous instincts and family court's gynocratic machinery form the ultimate tag team against male success. This book is your flamethrower. Modern men face industrialized betrayal. 72% of alimony hostages are male. Pensions get vacuumed by ex-spouses who have never logged a 60-hour week. And toxic masculinity screechers demonize the very traits that built civilization. You're not crazy, you're prey. I've dissected 327 divorce cases, interviewed men who rebuilt offshore empires after losing 2M net worths, and cracked the code on turning male disposability into unbreakable leverage. This isn't for everyone. If you still believe in white knights, healthy vulnerability, or sacrificing yourself on the altar of political correctness, close this book now. Go sip soy lattes with the humanities professors. But if you're part of the silent majority who's tired of being the government's ATM and feminism's piñata, here's your playbook. You'll learn to bulletproof assets using Paraguayan banking tricks Marcus Aurelius would have killed for. Expose the Marxist playbook hiding behind gender equity slogans. And weaponize evolutionary psychology to dodge paternity traps. I don't deal in platitudes. When the court tried seizing my second company, I didn't embrace healing. I hired a Venezuelan asset attorney and bought Bitcoin. The results? A 7-figure offshore portfolio and a lifestyle that can't be cancelled by some bored ex or blue-haired judge. This is survivalism for the digital age, blending Sun Tzu's tactics with testosterone-fueled pragmatism. To the men reading this, your biology isn't a flaw. Your work ethic isn't a crime. Let's torch the marriage plantation together. Surviving the Feminist Divorce, a guide to male resilience in a broken system. Written by Conrad Reicher. Buy now. Links in description.